Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Today, Barack Obama was in Pearl Harbor talking about peace, wringing his hands over the price of war. And it was just unbelievably phony to me. First of all, Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th, but he didn't care enough to do it until he happened to be there on his holiday. But it's also concerning to me because this is, and everybody points out that this is a reciprocal meeting based on Barack Obama going to Hiroshima this last summer and talking about how horrible war was there and taking that out of historical context. It's very important that we not take this out of historical context. Now, we had the Japanese prime minister say that he offered everlasting condolences. You know, that sounds very good, but there's less here than that sounds like. As we look at the report from Reuters, they say, and this is the Japanese cabinet secretary, he said, this visit to Pearl Harbor was to console the souls of the war dead, not to apologize. There was no apology for the Japanese unprovoked attack on this. And I fully understand. I've had people engage me on Twitter about this. I fully understand what happened with FDR. I fully understand that they wanted to get us involved in the war. But to blame Americans for what happened there and to excuse what the Japanese did is like blaming the female jogger who gets raped, saying that she should have known better than to go into that area, or she shouldn't have been dressed in jogging shorts because it was too provocative, or to say that it was okay for the Muslims to gang rape her because she didn't wear a full burqa. That is what people are saying when they don't want to put the blame on the Japanese. And of course, the Chinese, who suffered massive deprivations under the Japanese invasion, said that they repeatedly urged Japan to show greater repentance for World War II and Japan's invasion of China. Their foreign minister said the real reflection needed was reconciliation. And as he's talking about peace there, I want you to keep in mind how he is fomenting conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, creating conflict between the U.S. and the UN, creating a new Cold War between the U.S. and Russia, all these different moves that he's making, talking about how he's going to punish Russia for allegedly revealing the truth about Hillary Clinton and costing her the election. This is the guy who is now weeping for peace with the Japanese prime minister in Pearl Harbor. And as I point out, the Japanese prime minister made no apology. As a matter of fact, the cabinet secretary made it clear that this visit to Pearl Harbor was to console the souls of the war dead and not to apologize. Remember when Obama went to Hiroshima, what he did was he wrung his hands about the effects of technology getting out of hand and the death that was rained down there, and essentially making an apology to the Japanese for what had happened, removing the historical context. But the Chinese have made an interesting comment in the wake of all of this talk. China has repeatedly urged Japan, reports Reuters, to show greater repentance for World War II and for Japan's invasion of China. The foreign ministry spokeswoman there said real reflection was needed and not showpieces. Okay, she said reconciliation between inflictor and victim must and can only be established on the basis of sincere and deep reflection by the inflictor. And so when we take a look at this, I think it's interesting to look at this article on Infowars about Thomas Sowell, who is now retiring. He's been a commentator for many years, a columnist for many years, and he made an interesting comment about the things that he remembers and looking back over his career. He said, the first time I traveled across the Atlantic Ocean, as the plane flew into the skies over London, I was struck by the thought that in these skies, 1,000 British fighter pilots fought off Hitler's Air Force and saved both Britain and Western civilization. But how many students today will have any idea of such things, with history being neglected in favor of politically correct rhetoric? That is what we saw at Pearl Harbor. We see these events that happened in Pearl Harbor, the talk about all the people that died at Pearl Harbor, the talk of all the people that died at Hiroshima, and how horrific that was, and it was. But it is stripped from any historical context, and it has applied to it a heavy veneer of political correctness. And I want to read you one more quote from Thomas Sowell. He said, "Black adults during the years when I was growing up in Harlem had far less education than black adults today, but they had far more common sense. In an age of artificial intelligence, he said, too many of our schools and colleges are producing artificial stupidity, both among blacks and whites. You see, Obama and Abe, the Japanese prime minister, have divorced the death and the suffering of World War II out of any historical context. And listen to the way that Obama is using this politically. As they pointed out today, the Japanese prime minister said, I can almost hear the voices of the servicemen lost. Okay, but he's, again, not going to apologize for the act of aggression. Meanwhile, we see Obama pushing the TPP. That's part of this. He's pushing refugees. He's pushing racial politics. All this while removing Pearl Harbor from any kind of historical context. Look at the Daily Mail article here. They say the Japanese leader didn't say he was sorry for the military action. Instead, he offered sincere and everlasting condolences. Mirrors, they said, a visit that Obama made to Hiroshima, and they say it closes a loop on Obama's pursuit of nuclear nonproliferation and his Asian rebalance that includes a trade agreement that Donald Trump wants to scrap. See, he used this to promote political correctness. He used this to attack Donald Trump. He used this to promote TPP, a globalist agenda. He took a slap at Trump. He said, it is here that we remember that even when hatred burns its hottest, even when the tug of tribalism is at its most primal, we must resist the urge to turn inward. We must resist the urge to demonize those who are different. You see, Barack Obama is selling us a version of World War II that was based on tribalism, that was based on racism. That was not why the Japanese attacked. That is absolute stupidity. And anybody who believes that is absolutely devoid of any understanding of what's going on here. He also pointed out, and this is what the Japanese prime minister said. He said, we must never repeat the horrors of war again. This is a solemn vow the people of Japan have taken. And since the war, we have created a free and democratic country that values the rule of law, has resolutely upheld our vow never to wage war again. Now, that's great, but that's not really the lesson. The lesson should not be one of pacifism. The lesson should be one of non-aggression. That was the issue here. It was Japanese aggression. And unlike 9/11, we didn't attack the wrong country afterwards. We had about the same number of casualties that we did at 9/11, but we got the right country in that particular time. Now, as we look at Politico, they're saying, as we see these agendas, these globalist agendas being pushed even at a Pearl Harbor memorial, a bit late, I would add, but as they're pushing that, we see that Politico is saying Trump really can't do anything about NAFTA. He's going to really hit a brick wall. Politico, of course, heavily Democrat in their politics, they say President-elect Donald Trump may have ridden to the White House in a wave of working-class hatred for NAFTA, but he's going to find it tough to deliver on his promise to scrap the trade agreement that he blames for sending U.S. jobs abroad. They say dramatically changing the pact could instead threaten 14 million American jobs that rely on trade with Canada and Mexico. Now, that statistic comes from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And it, again, is removed from a true context. They can talk about 14 million American jobs that depend on NAFTA trade, but what they ignore is the deficit that we have with Mexico alone. We have had, as soon as NAFTA went into effect 22 years ago, we immediately went from a situation where we had a rough trade parity. One year they would have a deficit with us. The next year we would have a deficit with them. We have never had a trade surplus with Mexico since then. You can talk about 14 million jobs. Well, we had a $15 billion deficit with Mexico or greater every one of the 22 years. As a matter of fact, it's gone as high as $75 billion. But immediately that year, it jumped to $15 billion and increased from there. And yet, look at the way Politico, the Democrats, the globalists, spend this. We have Smith Ramos, the head of Mexico's Trade and NAFTA office in Washington, said, we, Mexico, are your top clients. Mexico is not a country that simply comes to ask for concessions from the United States. In other words, we're in charge here. You are our debtor. No, you are the ones who are making the money off of NAFTA, not us. He said, we buy more from the U.S. than all of the BRIC countries combined. Well, that may very well be true, but it is clearly taken out of context.
In case you haven't heard, Infowars has become the most influential media outlet in America. We're making freedom go viral. And now we are proud to announce a new weapon in the epic battle against the globalists. Infowars Prime, where you can watch live high-definition feeds of The Alex Jones Show, plus exclusive insider videos from the Infowars crew and behind-the-scenes action. Go to Infowars.com/app and download today. Infowars Prime is available right now for your iPhone or Android. You will have access to exclusive videos that you can't see anywhere else. And that means live coverage of events and breaking news on location as it happens. You can also take advantage of amazing deals from the Infowars store that are only available for Infowars Prime subscribers. That's Infowars Prime at Infowars.com/app. And if you can hear my voice, you are the resistance.